19 years since I won the state championship. So about time that I tried out the senior championship, see if I can do it one more time.
Best of luck. I bet you have a good chance.
I should be the highest rated guy in there. So that would be.
That's a good sign.
I have as good a chance as anyone.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm gonna start the previous. Guess I can try and maximize. And there we go. Come over here to give some sort of excuse for an introduction to tonight's meeting. So welcome everybody. I'll squeak it to the
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. McGrew, I don't know if you've heard, but our club has been invaded by rubber ducks, and that's kind of just a part of our identity now.
That's our mascot.
All right, then.
But this evening, we're really lucky to, first of all, be starting our series on the design of the universe and the world and humanity. And what better person to start with than Dr. Tim McGrew at Western Michigan. He is the patriarch of a whole dynasty of apologists with his wife, Lydia, and their daughter, Bethel, all being very influential in just the world of defending the Christian faith. And so we're going to talk tonight about miracles and why they are plausible. And we'll just hand it over to Tim. And I'm going to make sure I'm recording. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Go back to that. There we go.
All good. Okay. So now I'm back to seeing the more populated side of the room. So thank you guys for having me. In a moment, I'm going to share a screen. And if you could just give me some kind of verbal confirmation that it's working, that's always nice, because once I do that, I can't even see you. All I can see is my screen. The topic of miracles is one that I have spent quite a lot of time on. I guess you could say it's become my professional specialty. And I thought that I would focus tonight's discussion on one dimension of it, which is Hume's critique of reported miracles. For reasons that I'll lay out briefly, this has been tremendously influential. And although the influence isn't always named, and although it can sometimes be the case that somebody might fail to see it at a superficial glance, biblical studies today is absolutely shot through with Hume's influence. So I want to go ahead and give you an overview of who David Hume was and what he said. I always like to start these talks with an epigraph. Instead of using one from scripture this time, I'm going to take one from an experimental physicist, Francois Arago. Doubt, he writes, is a proof of modesty. It has seldom harmed the progress of the sciences. I could not say as much for incredulity. Apart from pure mathematics, whoever pronounces the word impossible is wanting in prudence. By the time we're done, I hope you understand why I chose exactly that as an epigraph for this talk. So are we all seeing the slides?
No, that might actually be on me this time. Sorry.
Turn the light off. Is it easier to see him, or does it get too dark? Let's see how. Okay. Would y'all rather have light on or off?
I think off. Yeah, I'm gonna vote off.
Yeah.
So where are we at on this? Are you seeing me or are you seeing the slide?
You're just you. You might not actually be sharing your screen.
Did you give him permission to share screen or whatever?
I should have
I may need that.
Did I not? Settings. Meeting options.
I don't know how this works in Teams. I could do it in Zoom, but I'm not sure how it is in Teams. In Zoom, I'd have to be a presenter, I think.
Yes, we thought about this before. Everyone can present.
So you've tried hitting that share button and it looks like it might be.
I'm hitting share. It's offering me a choice of what to share. I'm going to the window. I'm popping it up, and then I am clicking share. And I see it. but you don't.
If you hit, is there a chance you can do screen instead of just the window?
I can try that, yes. So share entire screen. However, when I go to entire screen, it is not giving me the option of putting that up the way I'm trying to. Let's try this. Are you seeing anything now?
Don't know. That might be that other user that you were joining as previously.
So that user's gone, right?
It should be.
I seem to be down to one now.
Yeah,
Do you want me to log out, log back in? Tell me what you need.
I guess it's always worth a try. Wish we didn't have
All right.
to do this so many times.
All right, we'll try this. I will be out and back again in a flash.
Sorry, everybody. We're halfway there. Living on a prayer. We'll make it.
Still not too far into the, or after 7, so we're okay.
He's not completely gone.
Get up there, talk about ducks.
Do we have a plan for where we're eating tonight that you could announce, or?
What is our plan? I think somebody had mentioned with Waterburger.
Hmm?
Somebody would mention Waterburger. Okay, here's meeting guests.
Okay.
Okay,
We hear you.
and we see your screen.
Yep.
There's a doctor.
All right.
But we don't see you, Dr. McGrew, so you might have to change the camera to whatever camera you were using.
That was my.
Although if-
Do, right? I think I've got this.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, that
All right.
was me. That was me.
Now let's try this share thing again. Share content. PowerPoint Live. See your notes, slides while you present. Okay, I'm trying to share the content here. This is fun. At least share content is a great deal more complicated looking than it was before.
Ah, we see a slide.
Got it.
There it is.
All right, are you seeing a bunch of other junk or is it just the slide itself?
Just a slide. This is a great view. We can see you and the slide both.
Oh, fantastic. Then we're in good shape. This will do. And then I can just tab through this as we go. So this is that quotation from Arago that I just read. And some of you will be familiar with the immortal film, The Princess Bride, and you'll remember a bit of exchange between Vizzini and Inigo Montoya, where Vizzini keeps on saying things are inconceivable. And Inigo says, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Yes, so we'll have a look at that. Let's get the view from a height. Let's look at the question that we all want an answer to, which is going to be, yeah, which is going to be great if I can find the place where you look at my PowerPoint and then keep you moving on. Okay, let's see. Here we go. All right. Is it reasonable for us in at least some particular cases to believe on the basis of the evidence we actually have that a miracle has occurred? That's the question we'd like to have answered, if we can. Is that a reasonable thing? If it's not, then we've got big problems with Christianity, because Christianity is a faith founded on the factual claim that a certain key miracle has occurred. And if that hasn't occurred, or if we're not in a position to say whether it has, then we're not in a strong position to defend the key claims of Christianity. So let's introduce the big guy here, David Hume. Big guy in multiple ways, as you can see. He obviously was a triple X size guy, extra, extra, extra large. Very fond of his food, he was. Hume was born in 1711. He died in 1776, the year of the American Revolution. He was the author of the most popular and the most influential argument against the credibility of miracle reports. It's a chapter of his philosophical essays, which was published in 1748. Now it's been retitled An Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding. So if you had a philosophy class, you're probably familiar with the book by that title. But this essay of miracles was just wildly popular, incredibly popular. And it went, it had many, many respondents, many detractors, but also a vast influence. And the shadow that it cast over philosophy and theology through the 20th century is almost impossible for me to overstate. It is clearly the most influential piece there. But it's undergone a change of fortunes since about the turn of the 21st century. And the change of fortunes has been so dramatic that it's hard for me to convey to you what that means for someone who was raised hearing all about how Hume had just settled this issue, to see anyone at all, criticizing that. Here is a passage from John Ehrman's book, Hume's Abject Failure, 2000. Hume's argument is largely derivative, almost wholly without merit where it is original, and worst of all, reveals the impoverishment of his treatment of inductive reasoning. You might be forgiven for wondering if John Ehrman is a Christian apologist. He is not. He is an agnostic. But he wrote the book Hume's Abject Failure, the argument against miracles, because he felt that Hume's argument represents the kind of overreach that gives philosophy a bad name. So there's a certain asperity in his tone. He is not gentle in dismantling Hume. And he says, right in the introduction, no doubt, this will infuriate many Hume scholars. Good, he says. There's been altogether too much genuflecting at the altar of David Hume. Hume takes three key positions about reported miracles, and each of them I would like to contest. So I want to lay out these 3 points, and then you'll see what I think are reasonable, which Hume thinks are not reasonable, and then we'll go into seeing where he says it and why he says it and what we should think about it. Here's the first point that I want to argue for. The existence of a stable order of nature does not count as evidence against the existence of miracles, at least if they are supposed to function as signs in a religious context. That bit about functioning as signs is very important. We'll come back to it. But for now, let me just say the word miracle, our word, comes from a Latin term, mirare, to wonder, and there is no single term that is an exact translation of that in Greek. So when you're reading the New Testament, you'll find talk about signs, wonders, and mighty works, but none of them is quite equivalent to our term miracle, though they seem all to be referring to things we would call miracles. But the function of signs is very important. More on that in a little while. Second point, which I think is reasonable, it ought to be possible to change one's mind about miracles. That seems to me to be just fundamental. Clearly, if this is an evidence-based inquiry, it ought to be possible for us to engage with it and change our minds. Third, the proper way to arrive at a reasonable belief, especially if the belief is worth the examining, is to examine the evidence in detail. Of course, there are things that are too trivial for us to spend our time evaluating it, but in proportion as the matter is important, the proper way to arrive at reasonable belief is to look at the evidence in detail. I think these are reasonable points. Hume disagrees with all of them. Let's see why. So point number one, again, just to restate, is that the existence
of a stable order of nature in which, say, dead men stay dead and virgins are not pregnant, does not count as evidence against the existence of miracles if they are supposed to function as signs in a religious context. Why would I say that? Hume very strongly disagrees. A miracle, he writes, is a violation of the laws of nature, and as a firm and unalterable experience has established these laws, the proof against a miracle from the very nature of the fact is as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined. So that's part 1, paragraph 12 of his essay of miracles, two-part essay. Well, if the proof against a miracle from the very nature of the fact is as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined, then what can be the upshot of looking into the evidence in favor of a miracle? At best, that's going to wind up being a weaker evidence, and so it's going to be overmastered, overmatched, overborne by this evidence that a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. That's a funny phrase. William Adams, who was a contemporary of Hume's and also Samuel Johnson's tutor at one point, writes in an answer to Mr. Hume's essay on miracles, an experienced uniformity in the course of nature hath been always thought necessary to the belief and use of miracles. These are indeed relative ideas. There must be an ordinary regular course of nature before there can be anything extraordinary. A river must flow before its stream can be interrupted. What is Adams getting at here? What is the point that he's trying to make? Adams is saying that a miracle makes sense only if there's a course of nature from which it is a deviation. If I say to you, I have just taken a sip of water, it's a miracle. You will at the very best be bewildered. What do you mean? We all drink water all the time. There's nothing miraculous about it. That's normal. A miracle is supposed to be something that stands out against the course of nature, something that nature could not do itself. That's why it causes wonder. That's why it seems to require for its explanation some source, some cause that is external to the natural order, because the natural order cannot produce this. So I think a better definition is a law of nature tells us how nature behaves when it is left to itself. But laws of nature do not tell us whether or how often nature is left to itself. There is somewhere a quotation which I now wish that I could hunt down. I have a feeling that it is Chesterton, but I have not been able to find the actual quotation. But it's to this effect, that Christians have been shouting from the rooftops for 2,000 years that the virgin birth and the resurrection are miracles. And then along come the skeptics who think that they can completely flummox us by pointing out that there's something a little bit odd about these things. Yes, we know nature doesn't do this. It's not that Christians are ignorant of the fact that sex is required for babies in the ordinary course of events. It's not that Christians are ignorant of the fact that dead men stay dead. It's because we know that that's the stable order of nature when nature is left to itself. And because we believe, we are persuaded that that nevertheless is not what happened, that we think nature has not been left to itself. So a miracle is not a violation of the laws of nature, as if it could take place only if the laws were false. It is a violation of the causal closure of the physical world. It's a violation of the assumption that we frequently make that nothing else is involved in the situation besides just the laws of nature and the physical surroundings up to and including ourselves and creatures much like ourselves. And if there are things nature can't do that we can't do that nevertheless occur, then we look for a cause elsewhere. Now, there's a general principle of evidence that is very important, and I'm going to state this. This will be the only bit of mathematics that makes its way into this talk. So if you are allergic to mathematics, you may want to close your eyes. It'll go quickly, I promise. So reads like this. If on the supposition that M were true, it would be inevitable that O also be true, then O cannot be evidence against M. So technically, if the probability of O given M equals 1, then the probability of M given O is at least as great as the probability of M. There, we're done. That slide is gone. You can open your eyes. Let me do the math in a non-technical way. Let me do it in a picture, okay? So in religious context, miracles are supposed to function as signs. Miracles that function as signs, signs of what? Signs of divine approval or divine presence, would be impossible unless they took place against the backdrop of a stable natural order, since that's what enables them to function as signs. Therefore, the existence of a stable order of nature cannot be used as an argument against miracles in religious context. So think of it this way. Think about John chapter 2, the story of Jesus at the wedding at Cana, turning water into wine. Miracle, right? But what if we discovered that one person in 100,000 or so has, in fact, as a purely natural power, the ability to turn water into wine? Rare, but not unknown. If we then read the story of Jesus turning water into wine at Cana, what would we say? Oh, he must be a prophet sent from God. This is a sign to approve his message. No, we'd say, oh, he's just one of those rare people who can turn water into wine spontaneously. And it would have no function as a sign of his divine mission, no kind of sign of the Father's approval, none of that. So there's got to be an order of nature where this just doesn't happen in order for the miracle to function as a sign. It's got to stand out against that. This may still be more complicated than what you're looking for, so let me show you my favorite signs. I have written on this sign a message, and it's a message I very much want you to take to heart. When you leave tonight, this is what I want you to remember. It's what I've written on this sign. Unfortunately, the font color and the background color are identical. And so the message can't stand out from the background because they're all the same. To be a sign, it has to stand out against the background. There's got to be a contrast. I can change the font color, and then the sign will be somewhat more helpful. Now you get my point, right? Oh, now I can see that as standing out against that backdrop of that regularity where it doesn't happen, but here it does. Something else is happening. Somebody else is intervening. So I think Hume's got the wrong definition of a law of nature. And because he does, he has this conception that just by pointing out that lots of dead people are still dead, he can create a powerful argument against the resurrection of Jesus. No, we know that that's what nature's like when it's left to itself. We insist upon it. If it weren't, then this wouldn't have the function that it does. All right, so much for my first point. Let's go to point number 2. I want to argue that it ought to be possible to change one's mind about miracles, but it turns out that on Hume's approach, this just isn't the case. I like this comment from William James. Certainly no defender of organized religion, and yet this quotation from The Will to Believe is, I think, an excellent one. A rule of thinking which would absolutely prevent me from acknowledging certain kinds of truth, if those kinds of truth were really there, would be an irrational rule. I think this is right. So if there really is a supernatural world there, and I follow a rule of thinking that would absolutely prevent me from acknowledging that it's there, that rule is irrational. That rule is not a rule I should follow. But Hume seems to take the opposite view. Here are some quotations. Speaking of someone who reports that there was a report of a miracle, I think this is Cardinal de Retz, he therefore concluded, like a just reason, that such an evidence carried falsehood upon the very face of it, and that a miracle supported by any human testimony was more properly a subject of derision. than of argument. Any human testimony, really. No matter how coherent and interlocking and overlapping the testimony is, no matter how many people offer the testimony, it's always better to just close your eyes and stick your fingers in your ears and go, la, 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 never believe a miracle. That just doesn't seem like a very rational approach. That's from Of Miracles, Part 2, paragraph 26. Again, he says, should this miracle be ascribed to any new system of religion, men in all ages have been so much imposed on by ridiculous stories of that kind that this very circumstance would be a full proof of a cheat, and sufficient with all men of sense not only to make them reject the fact, but even reject it without farther examination. Get this, right? Not only should you reject the miracle claim, you should reject it without farther examination. So there's a key question I try to inculcate in my students, the importance of asking this question at all times. You have a belief, you have your reasons for it, you hold on to it. If I am wrong, you should ask yourself, how am I going to find out? And I think this is an urgent problem for Hume on miracles. If he is wrong, how is he going to find out? Anyone who takes this point of view seems to be locking himself into a position where you should always reject such a claim without looking into the evidence for it. And if you are wrong, how is that going to help you to change your mind? Again, thinking back to James' rule, a rule of thinking that would make it impossible for me to know a certain kind of truth, if that were really the truth, would be an irrational rule. There's more. As the violations of truth are more common in the testimony concerning religious miracles than in that concerning any other matter of fact, this must diminish very much the authority of the former testimony and make us form a general resolution never to lend any attention to it with whatever specious pretense it may be covered. In other words, pay no attention to the evidence, make up your mind in advance, and don't let silly little things like facts change your mind. That again from Of Miracles, Part 2, paragraph 38. Let's do a test case for this. And let's do it in a non-religious sphere. Let's talk about meteorites. I love meteorites. Meteorites are amazing. I actually have some meteorites that condensed before our solar system was formed. Ask me how we know this. This is fun. So I got some from Brian Keating, who's a physicist who loves to work on meteorites and has enough to be able to give a few away. So I have a couple of these. They're amazing. So let's look at the historical question that was asked, do meteorites really fall from the sky? Are they of extraterrestrial origin? There are lots of stories going way back about stones that fall from heaven. But scientists, through the 18th century at least, were pretty incredulous about such stories. After all, the people who saw them were generally peasants. And what do peasants know? Really, I mean, you know, you've got a farmer who is out tilling in his fields and he says, there's a hole in his field and there's a hot rock at the bottom of the hole. Do you really believe that? Like it comes from outer space or from the moon or for, you know, what are you supposed to think about this? How crazy. The incredulity of scientists, and I use this word with a direct nod to Arago in our little epigraph, is quite a funny thing when it comes to meteorites. Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry, right? Elementary treatise on chemistry, who believed that meteorites were created by lightning, actually dismissed written affidavits that the stones were still warm when discovered. He reportedly took a pen and changed one of the affidavits, arguing that the rocks must have been artificially warmed. So I have a pro tip for you. I don't care if you're the father of modern chemistry. Do not do this. Do not change a written affidavit. Argue that the person who wrote the affidavit and swore to it was stupid. Argue that he was ignorant. Argue that he couldn't possibly be right. But don't change what he said. This is a no. Just don't go there. I don't care how great of a genius you are running the risk of looking like you're a complete idiot by doing this. Just don't. Just say no. Laplace refused to believe that rocks fell to the earth from outer space. Ernst Cladini writes in 1819 that disbelief and scorn was so common that many museums had discarded their collections of meteorites for fear of being ridiculed. Whoa. Well, we all know how that one turned out, right? If you are wrong, how are you going to find out? Probably not by throwing away your meteorite collection. The third point that I'd like to argue for is that the proper way to arrive at a reasonable belief, at least about something that is high stakes, where it really matters that we get it right, is to examine the evidence in detail. And you would think of all the points that I could make, surely this one is something that Hume himself could join in on, right? He's got to agree with me about this one. That just seems so obvious, it's barely worth contesting. Well, Hume sets out here on a promising note. He says, when anyone tells me that he saw a dead man restored to life, I immediately consider with myself whether it be more probable that this person should either deceive or be deceived, or that the fact which he relates should really have happened. Okay. I weigh the one miracle, by miracle there he just means improbability, against the other. And according to the superiority which I discover, I pronounce my decision and always reject the greater miracle, the less probable option. If the falsehood of his testimony would be more miraculous than the event which he relates, then, and not till then, can he pretend to command my belief or opinion. So there's a challenge here, right? What is it that we're supposed to do? Well, the Christian is supposed to bring forward his evidence, and Hume is supposed to show that it would be even more miraculous for the event to have occurred, even less probable for the event to have occurred than for this testimony, however good it is, to be false. So, what do you think Hume's successors, people in subsequent generations, said to this? I imagine that if you posed a challenge of this form to many pastors today, they would mumble something vague about faith and back away. That's not how, historically, people who engaged with Hume took it. So here's Peter Bain. Exactly. No statement could be more reasonable. Let us proceed then to the comparison. The Christian has to produce testimony to miracle, whose falsehood would be a mightier wonder than the miracle attested. And Hume has to weigh miracle against miracle. What was the next step to be taken in Hume's argument? What did his own statement require him to do? Clearly, to take up the miracles which Christians allege to be true, to set their evidence fully and distinctly forth, and to point out that however plausible that evidence might be, its fallaciousness would be no miracle compared with the miracle affirmed. Let's do this. But everybody knows that's not what Hume has done. Hume has done nothing of the sort. The nature of the evidence required for the Christian miracles, once fairly stated, those miracles are quietly put by him out of court. The trial proceeds by proxy. Hume does not ask what proof is offered that the Christian miracles took place. He calls to the bar certain miracles with which Christianity has nothing to do, enters upon their evidence, condemns them as falsities, and then calmly informs the court that the Christian miracles are disproven. He talks about some cures that were said to have been done in Alexandria in Egypt by General Vespasian, who would later become the Emperor Vespasian. He talks about a man in Saragossa who supposedly had his leg removed, but then rubbed the stump of it with holy oil and then supposedly had a leg grow back. This is the kind of thing that he's doing. He's not talking about the resurrection of Jesus. He's talking about these other things and saying, well, I bet you don't believe them, do you? And then, with a wave of the hand, dismissing the resurrection itself. So these things, so also some healings alleged to have happened at the tomb of the Abbé Paris in the early 1700s. These are the things that Hume talks about, not the resurrection, not the evidence for the resurrection, other things instead. The trial, as Bain says, proceeds by proxy. But let your inner skeptic speak up. We said the proper way to form a belief on these things is to examine the evidence in detail. Hey, wait a minute, says somebody. Doesn't it require more evidence to establish a miraculous claim than it does to establish an ordinary one? Like if I tell you that I rose from a deep sleep this morning and went to teach a class, that's pretty believable. If I tell you that I rose from the grave to go teach a class, maybe only my students would believe that this is the case, but you probably wouldn't. You'd have had to be there to see how tired I was. Not so plausible form of this is the slogan that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which sounds wonderfully clever. What exactly does that slogan mean? Well, I have done extensive research on this, and I think I've come up with it. It says Carl Sagan is the one who popularized the expression extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I would like to christen this argument in his honor as the argumentum Sagani. So here we go. As far as I've been able to determine after extensive internet research, the argumentum Sagani goes like this, approximately. Premise 1, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Premise 2, the claim that a miracle has occurred is extraordinary. Therefore, subconclusion, line 3, any evidence supporting it ought to be extraordinary as well. Moving on. I'm not sure what I mean by extraordinary. However, whatever you come up with, it's not going to work. Therefore, no one is justified in believing any miracle claim. I wish that this were not so true to life, but honestly, the expression is waved around and then no engagement with anything that you bring forward as evidence. Whatever you've got, we're not going to believe it. We won, la, 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 we can't hear you. I'm afraid this is the way the argument often goes. Let's do a scientific test case for this. According to one proposed theory in nuclear physics, spontaneous proton decay happens, but extremely rarely. So rarely that no instances have ever been observed. The theory predicts that they would decay at an incredibly low rate. And so there is a lot of evidence of protons not spontaneously decaying, but this theory says, yeah, but just once in a very great while it would. So scientists have set up sensitive detectors in underground water tanks in an attempt to see whether this actually takes place at this low rate. The fact that 100% of the protons so far observed have not decayed does not mean it's impossible for us to accept evidence of it. Otherwise, there'd be no sense in setting up these tanks with these detectors around the rim to try to spot any spontaneous proton decay. There would be no point to that because we would be determined to disbelieve it because they've never decayed before. So why would we believe it this time? Again, going back to that question, if you are wrong, how are you going to find out? The people who set up these tanks at least understood that they could change their minds if the evidence came in a certain way. Thomas Sherlock was Bishop of London, and he has a direct response to the question, but what about the fact that these claims are extraordinary? He says, I do allow that this case and others of like nature require more evidence to give them credit than ordinary cases do. You may therefore require more evidence in these than in other cases, but it is absurd to say that such cases admit no evidence when the things in question are quite manifestly objects of sense. What does he mean by that? Well, sometimes when I'm doing this with a large live audience, I like to ask them a couple of questions. did you have a close friend in high school, somebody that you hung out with? Most people will say yes. The rest of them, I don't know, but they're code monkeys and they just sat in their rooms and wrote. But if you had a friend that you hung out with, think of that friend. Sorry, sick burn on the code monkeys out there. My daughter's in computer science, so like I love you all. I might also have been that hacker who used to send his friend email notes from Bill Clinton at whitehouse.gov. I'm just saying. Okay, so no ports will be spoofed in tonight's talk. Remember a day that you spent hanging out with your friend. What you did, some of the things that you did. Are you prepared to swear to two things about that? Number one, that this really was your friend and not just somebody who looked a lot like your friend. Can you swear to that? And number two, can you swear that this person during that entire day was alive and not dead? Can you do that? Because if you can, then you can do what it takes to be able to attest that these facts are true facts. This is what the disciples were asked to do. They don't have to have been some kind of extraordinary medical doctors or something. Hang on a moment. I've got a phone ringing here. I'm going to turn it off. I don't have any idea where that came from, but there we go. So that's really all the expertise that you need. This is my friend, not somebody who looks a lot like my friend and is cosplaying. And this, my friend, was alive and not dead. Those are the facts in question. It doesn't take extraordinary expertise to swear to these things. It takes very normal human capacities, and I'm going to guess that every single one of you thinks that you're competent to attest to those things. That's what the disciples were attesting when they were attesting that they met with Jesus, ate with him, drank with him, spoke with him. That's all it takes. Does that take more evidence for a miraculous claim? Could you say, are you sure you couldn't have been mistaken? Yes, you can ask, but you can't say nothing that you could say would convince me that you weren't hallucinating or lying. That is placing it beyond the reach of evidence. And the matters in question are matters of sensory experience. They're things you can see your friend, you can talk with your friend, you can touch your friend, you can hear your friend. You know that this is your friend by the same kinds of means that you know all kinds of things empirically. So that's what Sherlock means by that. But let's raise another objection. So you say we're supposed to examine miracles by the evidence. We're supposed to look at the evidence. Well, there are hundreds of thousands of miracle claims around the world. Where are we supposed to start? And if I want to put a little sneer on and put my skeptical aspect on, I could say, oh, I suppose you want me to start with your miracle claims, right? Why should I start with yours? How about some Hindu ones instead? Oh, didn't want me to start there? How about Mormonism? No, how about rainbow bodies in Buddhist monasteries in Tibet? Oh, no, you didn't want me to start with those? Well, why not? Why should I start with your miracle claims rather than any of the hundreds of thousands of other miracle claims that there are out there? So it's true that there are many religions and thousands upon thousands of miracle claims. That's absolutely correct. So if that's the case, many people ask, how could anyone hope to use miracles as evidence for a religion? You've got claims, they've got claims, everything sort of cancels out. But it doesn't really unless the claims are equally well attested. What we're looking for is some kind of filter, some kind of method that we can use to find the most promising cases to start looking. So there are neutral criteria that make no reference to any particular religious creed and can be seen to be reasonable without any appeal to one religion or another. They can help us to filter out unpromising candidates for a religious miracle. They're not going to guarantee that it didn't happen, but they are a good way of sifting through and saying, here, if anything makes it through the filters, then it's the most promising place to start. 3 of these were laid out by John Douglas in his book, The Criterion. You'll notice the date, 1757. Hume would still live 19 years after the publication of the criterion. So, Douglas said, a miracle claim may reasonably be doubted when it is reported only long after the miracle is supposed to have happened. That's a reason for doubting it. It may reasonably be doubted when it is reported only at a great distance from the scene where it is supposed to have happened. And third, it may be doubted if it would have been allowed when first made to pass without examination. If the context in which it was made was one where no one would be all that motivated to check up on it, then that is itself a reason for doubting it. So let's see some claims that fail on these criteria. On the first criterion, when the first report comes long after the event, Philostratus' Life of Apollonius of Tyana was written over a century after the death of Apollonius. There is time there for the growth of legend and for forgetting what originally happened. The Lives of Pythagoras were written 8 centuries after his time. Lots of time for us to see legends developing, lots of reason to worry that these may not be authentic accounts of what happened. Many of the miracle claims of the Middle Ages, Saint Genevieve, who when she walked, every place that her foot fell, a flower would spring up in her wake, not reported until after her death. When these things are not reported at the time, or very close to the time that they are said to have transpired, there is reason to doubt the claims. Failing on the second criterion, when the first report is made only at a great distance from the alleged event, nearly all the miracles attributed to Apollonius of Tyana by Philostratus are reported in a document that he's writing. I think he's in Rome at this point, and they're talking about his travels to India. That's a long way from Rome. And so not only is there a big gap in time, there's also a big gap in space, right? We can be cynical about miracle claims that are always very far away, conveniently out of reach of anybody to check up on them. The third criterion, when the miracle claim would be allowed to pass without critical examination because it supports or affirms established opinions and prejudices. Virtually all of the miracles of ecclesiastical history, all of the medieval miracle claims are of this sort. The healings attributed to Vespasian in Alexandria, there's funny stuff about this. A blind man, or at least a man claiming to be blind, and a man claiming to be lame, presented themselves to the emperor and said that they'd been in the temple of the local god Serapis, and they had had a vision saying that they should go to the emperor and he would heal them. Now, this is Alexandria in the middle of the 1st century. The Temple of Serapis is experiencing challenges from this rival religious movement of the Christians in their midst. And Vespasian is on the point of declaring his pretensions to become the next Roman emperor, but he is not nobly born, so he kind of needs something to buff up his credentials. He asks his physicians what's going on with this, and they say, well, the blind guy's not totally blind, and the lame guy's not totally lame, and you might as well try it, and if it doesn't work, we'll blame them, so nothing lost. Wouldn't you know, he touches them and they leap up and declare that they can see and that they're no longer lame, and they, everybody wins, right? The priests of the Temple of Serapis win because their god gave this message. Vespasian wins because he's now a miracle worker in the eyes of the people. That adds to his resume for becoming the emperor. So this is something that fails on the third criterion. There's reason to doubt that anybody would have really been all that concerned to examine it too terribly closely. Similarly, the alleged restoration of a man's leg in Saragossa in Spain, this is something that would definitely redound to the credit of the Roman Catholic Church in Saragossa, which is the dominant religion in Saragossa, but there's no hostile context. There's nobody there to be doing the cross-examination. something William Adams says in his answer to Hume is so beautiful on this. There is a wide difference betwixt establishing false miracles by the help of a false religion and establishing a false religion by the help of false miracles. Nothing is more easy than the former of these, or more difficult than the latter. What does he mean? He means that if you've already got people who believe a religion, they're likely to be well disposed toward a putative miracle being enacted on behalf of their religion. But if they are not already disposed toward your religion, trying to fake a miracle is likely to be unsuccessful at best and fatal at worst. Hostile context makes a world of difference. I sometimes put it this way: if you were unscrupulous and you wanted to try your hand at starting a new religious movement, and I offered you your choice of plane tickets, one of them, I'll give you a one-way plane ticket, you go to Milwaukee and you try to start up your new religion there. The other one's a one-way plane ticket to Mecca. Where do you want to try starting a new religion? I mean, in Milwaukee, best of luck. It might work, it might not. In Mecca, you'll be dead before you hit baggage claim.
Yeah.
All right. The hostile context makes an enormous difference. Are there people there who just procured the crucifixion of your rabbi? Are the military and the religious authorities in concert on this? Then, man, that's not a promising place to start. There's a hostile context. They're going to sift anything that you say. This is the most unpromising place to try to fake a new religion. Very difficult to do. Once you got the religion established, people are often willing to give a pass to anything that seems to support it. But when you don't have it, trying to bring it to them by means of a claimed miracle, unbelievably difficult. They will be hostile. They will cross-check your claims. I'd like to draw a methodological moral from one of the great theologians of the 19th century, Sherlock Holmes. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. I think he's got David Hume's number here. So with that, I will stop the screen sharing and come back. And now I can see you guys and I think 4 other people who are on here logging in externally. How do you want Q&A to be handled? Do you guys have a methodology for that? Do you, we could just like talk for another 15 minutes or so?
Yeah, I think we can just open it up to anybody that has a question.
Can
Or
somebody be
Tim?
monitoring the online people too, so that if they want to say something, they have a chance?
Yeah, good point. Well, first of all, thank you for that, Tim. That was a wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Cello Lee.
I guess I'll ask a question. At the beginning of last semester, I gave a talk on restored reliability of the Gospels, and I mentioned the argumentum sagami, I guess.
Yeah.
And I sort of, my impression as I was thinking through that from what I had studied in epistemology before was that it's legitimate to kind of refute that claim by saying that in reality, extraordinary claims require just as much evidence as any other claim, provided they would be the best explanation for things by those processes of abductive reasoning that we learn. And so, as you were talking about that, and you were mentioning for Bishop Thomas Sherlock, his claim that such cases may require more evidence, but it's absurd to say they admit no evidence. I noted that he didn't really explain why such cases do require more evidence. So is there a standard that you know about epistemologically that would actually give you a reason to say that extraordinary claims do require more evidence than ordinary claims?
Sure. So let's to get to this, we have to come up with a definition of extraordinary. And one of the problems is that it's very difficult to get people to settle on that. So let's try to steelman this argument by coming up with a definition where it would make sense to say you need more evidence for them. Let's describe an extraordinary claim for our purposes as one which initially and before our examining any evidence for it, using only our background knowledge, seems to us quite improbable. Okay. And there are such claims that I think we would all agree. You know, if I said I flapped my arms so fast the other day that I actually rose into the air, you would say, yeah, what were you wearing? How did you manage that? And I said, nope, just in a short sleeve polo shirt, and I just flapped my arms super fast. And you say, yeah, no, I don't think that happened, right? So a claim that is initially improbable is one that I think we realize you need the kind of evidence that overcomes the improbability. But saying that it is improbable does not lock you into saying you have to have one great, big, amazing piece of evidence for it. You can have dozens of small pieces of evidence, all of them tending in the same direction. So if you just think about vector addition, right, in linear algebra, you got a whole bunch of relatively small vectors all pointing in the same direction. When you add the vectors, you wind up with a rather large vector pointing in that direction. The evidence accumulates. Similarly here, when we've got pieces of evidence that dovetail with one another that all seem to be pointing in the same direction, many small pieces of evidence can do the work that needs to be done to overcome any finite improbability. And this is something that's a key part of John Earman's critique, and one of the reasons he's so frosted with Hume is that he says, look, if you've got enough independent witnesses, you can overcome any antecedent bias, any antecedent improbability by their combination of their testimony. And this is something that was known as far back as the first half of the 19th century, when Charles Babbage, one of the founders of modern computer science, actually wrote a book called the Ninth Bridgewater Treatise, in which he gave a recognizably modern Bayesian analysis of the Humean scenario and showed that, in fact, as long as you can get independence of the witnesses, you can always overcome any antecedent improbability. So I think the thing to do would be to say, let's define an extraordinary event as one that we are reasonably skeptical about because we think it's initially improbable. But let's make sure that we don't misdefine extraordinary evidence as meaning just one spectacular, splashy piece of evidence, and that instead we speak about the weight of the total amount of evidence as being sufficient to offset our initial skepticism. In that case, fine. Low probability events require more evidence to raise their probability to the level of believability than initially higher probability events do. But so what? That's merely a challenge to produce good evidence. And if there is plenty of good evidence, we'll blow right past that. And so that's okay. It's not a problem. It's not a drawback to say, yeah, some claims require more evidence than others. That's fine. We can absorb that. We don't have to contest that. Then we simply produce the evidence. That does have a drawback, I admit. You got to do your homework, right? If you're going to take that kind of a line and then somebody says, all right, show me this evidence, you may be in for a long conversation. Something I would encourage you guys to go and read. This came out just earlier this week, so it's really rather fresh. One of the people who co-founded Wikipedia, though he has since moved away from that and worked on other projects, is named Larry Sanger, Sanger. And he's got a website. I think it's just larrysanger.com. And just like February 6th or so, he posted an article there saying, this is how a philosopher becomes a Christian. He's a philosopher by training, was a philosopher by profession for a while, quit that, did some internet projects, made his pile of money, I assume. But he has been wrestling with Christianity for 30 some years. And he tells like a pilgrim's regress story of his moving back through the stages and the levels of unbelief. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's long, and he's not shy about staking out his position at the end and telling you exactly what he believes. In the last portion of it, he's come not just to theism, but to Christianity very specifically. And I mean, he's citing Bible verses. He's going for it. He's not shying away. So I think Larry Sanger's conversion is the kind of thing that we ought to look at and say, it might take a very long discussion. It might take a lot of moving pieces to persuade somebody who is initially not disposed to believe you and is hard-headed and requires evidence and likes clarity. But it is very much worth doing. So let me just commend that to you. I can send Alan or Kenneth the link to the Sanger thing, but some of you have probably found it already by now.
I saw
You got
that.
it?
That is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be having a Zoom call with him in a week or so. We've made contact with each other now, so that'll be
Wow.
fun.
Right. You know, it's ironic how some of the really hardcore skeptics, you know, people ask them, well, what would it take for you to believe? And they often cite miracles. It's like they really know that Hume is wrong in this kind of approach, I think. And
Yeah, sometimes they concede that with their right hand, and then they sneak in and take it away with their left by saying, "But you could never persuade me that a miracle had occurred."
that's true
Right?
too.
Okay.
Yeah. Like maybe
Like Richard Dawkins. So, yeah, somebody I think asked Dawkins, like, you know, well, what would you do if you saw one with your own eyes? And basically his response was, I'd check myself into a psychiatric institution.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. Yeah.
Okay, so if you are wrong, you're never going to find out. Okay, I see that. Unable to change your mind. But that's a choice. That's not something forced on us by the logic of the situation. Hume's argument does not force us to that. That is a choice. If you say, I won't change my mind, you can say that, but that is not the way truth ought to be sought by a rational being.
You can't stand before God and say, not enough evidence when you're not seeking it out.
Yeah, really? Well, maybe if you'd lift your eyes above the level of your shoelaces and never mind. Yeah.
I was a little surprised you said, I knew people like Ehrman, and there, you know, there's been some well-publicized critiques, but it sounds like there's this groundswell against him in the 21st century. Is it mainstream philosophy now? Do they pretty much reject Humean arguments?
Let's just say there's a fight going on, and that is a complete change from the era when no one would have written a book entitled A Defense of Hume on Miracles, like Robert Fogelin did with Princeton University Press. Why would anyone write a book defending Hume? Hume needs no defense. At a conference in Southwest Michigan some years ago, a set of panelists were discussing these things. One of the panelists had made some disparaging remarks about miracles, and a philosophy professor in the Q&A got up and said, I was interested in what you said because I'm not actually persuaded that you're right. And the famous speaker cut him off, just said, then you need to read Hume. And the professor at the Q&A microphone said, well, actually, I have read Hume, and he cut him off again and said, then you need to read him again.
Oh, wow.
That was it. That was the argument, was Hume. And the answer to yes, but was more Hume. So if I am not persuaded by this, it's like something out of Lewis Carroll, right? What I tell you 3 times is true, the Bellman's rule. No, it's just not. That's not a rule of inference. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
What do you know of any miracle claims that would not fail the three or any one of the three criteria you listed that are not Christian?
I do not, but I have looked for them. I gave a talk down there for actually it was a debate that I did down in the Dallas-Fort Worth area with Zach Moore. I think Alan was there and may remember that on miracles. And in the Q&A, a fellow came up to a microphone and said he knew of one, and it was a Hindu miracle. And I said, this is awesome. Find me afterward. I want details about this. So afterward, he did not come up to me. And so I had to hunt him down in a room of hundreds of people. And I eventually found him. And it turned out that all he had was when he was a kid, he had read a book for Hindu children in which it was claimed that there was such a thing. So the search goes on. I am looking for that. I do not think that I could say a priori that such things don't happen. Look, if Christianity is true, there is a spiritual realm that's inhabited by more than just God.
Yeah.
So there are other forces that could be at work as well. So I am not closed to this, even as a Christian, I'm not closed to the possibility of supernatural events occurring outside of the Christian tradition. But I just haven't seen any evidence that would even significantly pass the filters to get us to the point. And there are other filters as well. I mean, those are three of them. There are some more things I could say, but yeah, it's actually a pretty robust filter. It works pretty well.
We have debate watching
Not-
parties
not-
sometimes, and I mentioned that maybe we should watch that debate sometime. It's pretty interesting since it is local from this like atheist leader in the Dallas area and so forth.
It's relatively new, right?
It's been a few years. Do you recall what year that was?
It's like a decade ago, I think.
Yeah,
Might be 2015, 2016.
yeah.
Yeah, so right. It was real. It was fun. I kind of got roped into the debate. God bless him. Ezra Boggs does a lot of organizing of events down in your corner of the world. And when Ezra heard I was coming, he said, well, would you do something for us? I said, sure, Ezra, I'll do anything you want. And before I knew it, he had turned around and put me up in a debate. So like, okay, all right. It's not what I had in mind, but and then Alan was present for this. So Alan can bear me out on this. The way the proposition at issue in the debate was worded was something like resolved, it could never be rational to believe a reported miracle, which I thought was an awfully strong point to saddle my opponent with. Just like, I mean, that's really, no matter what the evidence, that's really crazy. So Alan and I had dinner with Zach the night before the debate. And I said to him, Zach, all of my friends and some of yours think that you may have walked into a verbal trap here. And I have no interest in scoring some kind of cheap verbal victory. So if you feel that this has been phrased in a way that's prejudicial to your actual position, then we'll just walk in there tomorrow night and we'll say, hey guys, we just want to let you know up front, we're going to argue, we're going to disagree, we're going to talk about miracles, but we're going to finesse the proposition a little bit, because I don't want to like score points on this just because it's been worded in a way that makes it very hard for you to maintain your position. And Zach looked me right in the eye and said, nope, I'm good. Do you remember this, Alan?
Absolutely, yeah. And you gave him multiple chances to change it, and he he went with it. And then within, I think, 20 minutes into the debate, he was already saying, "Well, I lost the debate, but," and sort of conceding it and still arguing. But it was
but
quite
there's something
interesting.
else. Yeah. Anyway, so we we passed through the evening and we made it out on the other side and we were still friends. I do have just one other fun thing that I remember from that debate. It was at the Bible and Beer Consortium. So we were actually at a bar, and they were going around. There was a guy going around handing people blue wristbands, which were what you wore to show that you were certified as being of age, so you could go to the bar and order alcohol. So he's like, giving you your license to get a drink. And I didn't know what it was for at first. So he's like holding one out to me. I said, "What is this?" And he told me, and I smiled, and I pointed over at Zach, and I said, "Give him 2 of them." By the time we were done, I think maybe he felt like he needed it.
Yeah. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, good times.
Any other question before we're out of time here?
Can I sneak one in?
Please.
Okay, so kind of like a skeptical flip side, adding on to the previous question. So would you say that, I don't want to like overstate this, would you say that all of the Christian miracle claims fit those 3 categories? Or would
No.
you say that, okay, you would say the central claims, the central miracle
I would say
claims?
there are central miracle claims that pass through the filters so that there's not those prima facie reasons for doubting them, and the resurrection is chief among them. It was proclaimed in the place at the time amid a hostile audience that this was supposed to have taken place, and so that one is sort of a stellar example. But notice the criteria themselves are not narrowly tailored around Christianity. It just happens that, unlike, say, the Mormon claims, the Christian claims are actually claims that meet those criteria. The criteria are themselves topic neutral. They should commend themselves to anyone who wants to say, well, what would I be looking for as a plausible place to start looking? I would look for something that didn't have some mark of worry already attached to it that it might not be credible. Remember, failing on a criterion doesn't mean the claim is false. It simply means it's not a promising place to begin your hunt for a genuine miracle.
Gotcha.
Does that help?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, good
No,
question.
no, that was a perfect answer.
Right. You said something interesting about the Mormon claims there, and I'm wondering what you mean by that, because I see how the historical claims in the Book of Mormon don't pass really any of those criteria. But I'm wondering if like the giving of the Book of Mormon itself, which would be viewed as miraculous, would qualify as something that should have priority on getting tested for its evidence. Yes.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. And this is kind of a fun one. Let me see. Hang on a second. I'm gonna see if I can pull up a document.
Good question.
Here we are. Yes. So, one of the things that the Mormons are really good for is that they have kept records of a lot of things. I found in the Deseret Weekly, issue number 48 from 1894, an account of the death of William Smith, the last surviving brother of Joseph Smith. And there's an account taken down of an interview with him just before his death, like 2 weeks before William's death. They asked him if he ever saw the plates his brother had, from which the Book of Mormon was translated. And he replied, quote, "I did not see them uncovered, but I handled them and hefted them while wrapped in a tow frock and judged them to have weighed about 60 pounds. I could tell they were plates of some kind and that they were fastened together by rings running through the back." He asked, "Did any others of the family see them?" "Yes," said he. "Father and my brother Samuel saw them, as I did, while in the frock." Is this the frock, the one that Joseph took with him, especially to wrap the plates in? No, it was his everyday frock, just like a long upper garment for a young man. Didn't you want to remove the cloth and see the bare plates? Said brother B. No, he replied, for father had just asked if he might not be permitted to do so. And Joseph, putting his hand on them, said, no, I am instructed not to show them to anyone. If I do, I will transgress and lose them again. Did you not doubt Joseph's testimony sometimes? Said brother Briggs. No, was the reply. We all had the most implicit confidence in what he said. And I ask you, where is the hostile context here? So I can put into the chat the link for this this newspaper article. So I'll just go over to the chat there, chat, put them, and there. So you can follow the Google Books link and you can read that all for yourself.
Great answer.
I should add, you know, I actually have a Mormon fellow who's a professor in Utah who came out to Kalamazoo to ask me if he could have my help in working on a book manuscript in the philosophy of religion. And I said yes, and he did, and we had a great time. He's a great guy. I like him a lot. His book has been accepted for publication. So he got tenure, but we didn't talk about the Mormonism thing at all.
Thank you so much, Dr. McGrew. This was a great time.
Yeah,
Hey,
really
I'm glad that eventually we got all the difficulties worked out. So thank you guys so much for having me. And if you need anything else from me, let me know. I can send my slides to Alan so you guys can have these slides and then you don't have to guess at the references. Some of them have hyperlinks in them you can follow.
Appreciate that. Yeah, we'll get those posted to the Discord. Yeah, and hopefully you can visit us again in person sometime, and some of these new students can meet you in person.
Absolutely would love to. There is a chance that I'll be going to the EPS meeting in Boston in November. So I don't know if any of you would have any interest in going to that. The Evangelical Philosophical Society and Evangelical Theological Society meet concurrently. There is some chance that I might be going there. Details to follow. We're still working this out, but I've been invited, so we'll see whether that stands.
Okay.
But if any of you are there, I'd love to chat with you there. And yes, Alan, I need to get back down to Texas again. I know this, but I'm just not man enough to come down in your summers, so it's going to have to be some cold time.
Understood. And you've got a lot going on with the family, so no pressure.
All right.
We'll pray for Lydia.
Guys.
Blessings.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Need to have another chess master class in a garage.
That was amazing. Yeah.
I love that. So which Whataburger would we be going to? Because I always have to just go to the wrong one.
It should be the one by the Steak and Shake, which is
Okay.
Steak and Shake by the Sonic, which is the Sonic by Rosas, which is the Rosas by the Walmart, which is it's on Coy and Maple
It's the
Street.
one
The
that's by
conjunction of
everything
all
else we go
those
to.
is
Yeah, I want to keep everything in the same location, so.
Can I ask for an absolutely terrible favor before we all leave? So I have a class assignment where I am required to go to a club meeting and it's due next week. And my proof of meeting has to be a selfie with the group. And I
Please
feel
take it.
absolutely terrible for asking. Would it be okay?
Feel bad.
Okay. Thank you. This is probably my last meeting, so I appreciate that. No, are y'all cool doing like a cool, awesome duck selfie thing? Y'all great? Get the duck? Okay, perfect. Okay, wonderful. I appreciate it. I'll make sure to edit it, make us all look really good.
I can give you a official selfie right here.
Oh, wait. Can we do this? Because this could be the first official use of this. Oh, wow, that's okay.
I don't know.
I don't know if I like this anymore.
Sorry.
Slowly getting more uncomfortable. Wait, hold on. This looks really official though, so wait, let's. Okay, hold on. Wow, this might be the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
Do I need to look this way?
Do we all? Yeah.
All right.
Smile or?
Wait, well, I'm not a student,
Yeah,
so
no,
I
just
throw it
there.
on.
God, what on earth am I? Ah. All right.
I'm included.
Fine.
I was on the other side of the screen, but I.
All right. And smile, blessings, awesome. We're cooler than the rest of the club. All right. Man, thank y'all so much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Oh, it's
Thanks.
blue too. Oh, it looks even better. All right. I appreciate y'all.
Well,
The other one, I didn't read the fine print.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
It had such a satisfying screen.